In the summer of 1988, a retired schoolteacher named Evelyn Marsh lay dying in a hospice room in Tucson, Arizona. Her children came, her grandchildren came. Her eldest daughter held her hand. And then, in the final hours before she slipped into unconsciousness for the last time, she said something that none of them had prepared for, something that none of them could explain, something that, once it entered the room, could not be walked back. She told them the Greys had been visiting her family since before any of her children were born, since 1947. 4 decades, not one word. And the strangest part, she didn't seem frightened. She seemed, finally, like someone who had put something very heavy down. I want to start not with Evelyn the woman, but with the house. Rural Route 9, outside Roswell, New Mexico. That's the address her family pieced together from fragments, a postcard sent to her mother in the summer of 1947, a hand-drawn map found folded inside a Bible after Evelyn's death, a single notation in a household ledger that her daughter Patricia noticed only when she was looking for something else entirely. Rural Route 9, a farmhouse her parents had worked since the early 1930s. Evelyn was 22 years old that summer, recently married, living with her husband Leonard in the back bedroom of her childhood home while Leonard looked for work. She had been, by all accounts, a practical young woman, a reader, a planner, someone her mother described in letters as sensible in the way that matters. That changed in the summer of 1947. According to what she told her daughter Patricia in those final hours, the first visit came on a night in late June. Not to Evelyn herself, not initially, to the property. She described waking to a quality of light coming through the bedroom curtains that she said she recognized, even in that first moment of consciousness, as wrong. Not wrong like a fire, wrong like a correction, as though the darkness outside had been quietly revised while she slept. She woke Leonard. He didn't stir. She said she tried twice, and that he lay with the specific stillness of someone whose sleep has been, in some way she couldn't name, managed. She went to the window alone. What she described seeing in the field behind the farmhouse is the part of Evelyn's account that her family still struggles to speak about evenly. A light source she could not locate, not above, not below, simply present, the way temperature is present, filling the field without originating from any point she could identify. And figures. She said there were 3. Moving through the field in a way that she described carefully and after apparent reflection as purposeful but unhurried. Small, pale in the diffuse light. She watched them for what she believed was several minutes before they simply were no longer there. Not gone, no longer there, as if the space they had occupied had quietly closed around their absence. She went back to bed. She did not wake Leonard. In the morning she said nothing. That silence, the first one, the choice made at dawn on an unnamed day in June of 1947, is the one that set the shape of everything that followed. Here is what the available record, imperfect, fragmentary, but stubbornly present, suggests about the years that followed. Evelyn did not have one experience and spend the rest of her life processing it. That is the first thing her family wants to be clear about. This was not a single night that haunted her. The visits, as she described them in those final hours, recurred, not frequently, not on any schedule she could identify, but across the late 1940s and through the 1950s, they came back to the farmhouse on rural Route 9 and later to the house in Tucson that she and Leonard moved into in 1953, and at least once, she said, to the elementary school where she taught 4th grade for 11 years. Her daughter Patricia, who has spoken with me at length, describes going back through her own childhood memories after the confession and finding things she hadn't known to notice at the time. A period in the late 1950s when Evelyn began sleeping with the curtains open, which she had never done before, and which she never explained. A habit she developed of pausing at windows at night, not looking out exactly, but not looking either. A rule she enforced without apparent reason throughout Patricia's childhood. No one was to go into the back garden after dark without telling her first. No one is to go into the back garden after dark without telling her first. Patricia obeyed that rule for 18 years without questioning it. She questioned it now. In a box of Evelyn's personal effects that Patricia sorted through in the months after the funeral, there was a notebook, spiral-bound, the kind used for grocery lists and household notes, that contained, interspersed with shopping reminders and appointment records, a series of dated entries that Patricia initially took for weather notations. They were brief, typically a single line, a date, and then a phrase. Same field, 3, or kitchen window movement 2, AM, or simply again. Patricia counted 14 such entries across a span from 1949 to 1961. Then they stopped. Not because the visit stopped, Patricia now believes, because Evelyn stopped writing them down. That distinction between a silence and a stoppage is one I keep returning to. Evelyn Duchamp, her maiden name, which she kept professionally throughout her teaching career, was, by every account, a woman of precise language. Her former colleagues at the elementary school in Tucson, two of whom her granddaughter Claire tracked down in the early 2000s, described her as someone who chose her words with care that occasionally made people slightly uncomfortable. Not cold, exacting. One colleague recalled that Evelyn would sometimes pause mid-sentence for several seconds before continuing, as though she was auditing what she was about to say before releasing it. That precision makes certain fragments of the Deathbed account unusually arresting. Evelyn said the beings did not communicate with her the way they apparently communicated with some of the other cases I've encountered in this kind of work. Not through impression, not through what others have called a landing of meaning. She said they communicated with her family over the decades of their visits, primarily through arrangement, through the placement of things. She described returning to the back garden the morning after a visit and finding objects, stones, twice, a length of wire once. On one occasion, a dead bird arranged in configurations she said were not random and were not natural, but that she could not interpret. She said she came to understand over years that the arrangements were not messages in any code she could crack. They were acknowledgements, evidence of attention, the way you might leave a mark, not to say something specific, but to say, I was here, I saw you, I am aware of you. I have turned that over many times. What does it mean to be the subject of that kind of attention across 4 decades? Not contact in the way we usually imagine it, not communication, not abduction, not the dramatic rupture of ordinary life. Something quieter, a sustained patient awareness directed at one family, expressed through the gentle rearrangement of small things in a garden across 40 years. She said she believed they were specifically interested in the children. Not in a way that frightened her, she was careful to say this, and her daughter Patricia confirmed she was emphatic about it. Not interested in harm, interested in observation. She said she had the persistent sense, which she had never been able to fully rationalize, that her children and later her grandchildren were being, in some way she couldn't articulate, tracked, not monitored for threat, monitored the way a scientist monitors something they consider significant. She said she had eventually made a kind of peace with that. Through the 1960s and most of the 1970s, Evelyn's family life, on the surface, was ordinary. Leonard worked, the children grew up, Patricia married, the grandchildren arrived, Evelyn taught her 4th graders and attended church and kept her garden, and was, by all outward evidence, a contented woman in the middle years of a settled life. But Patricia, speaking to me about those decades now, uses a phrase that has stayed with me. She says her mother was always slightly ahead of things. Not psychic, Patricia is careful about that word. Just ahead. She knew when someone was coming before they arrived. She knew when a phone call was going to be difficult before she picked it up. She knew twice that Patricia can specifically recall that something had happened to a family member before anyone had called to say so. Patricia attributed it at the time to a mother's intuition. She attributes it differently now. Leonard died in 1971. Heart failure sudden at 63. Patricia says that in the weeks after his death, Evelyn was grief-stricken, but not in some way Patricia struggled to name. Surprised. She said it was as though Evelyn had been given a notification she hadn't shared, as though she had known, in the way she sometimes knew things, that the call was coming and had been quietly preparing. There were no garden arrangements in the notebook after 1961, but Patricia found something else when she looked more carefully through Evelyn's papers. A series of greeting cards sent to no one, never mailed, tucked into the back of a recipe box. Each one had a date written on the inside cover and nothing else. The dates corresponded, Patricia eventually worked out, to birthdays, not of family members, but of no one Patricia could identify. 8 dates across 20 years, 8 birthdays of people who, as far as Patricia could determine, did not exist in any family record or address book Evelyn had ever kept. Whose birthdays was she marking? What was she acknowledging? This is where I try to be most careful. Evelyn's account in those final hours, as recalled by Patricia and her brother Douglas, and partially corroborated by the hospice nurse who was present for the last portion of the conversation, included specific claims about the nature of the Greys' interest in her family, that her children have spent years trying to understand. She said she believed the visits had begun not because of anything she or Leonard had done, but because of something about the land, about rural Route 9 specifically. She said she had come to believe through decades of observation and the slow accumulation of small evidence that the property had been a point of interest before her family arrived there, that they had moved into something already in progress. She described it as inheriting a conversation you hadn't started. She said she believed her children had been observed from infancy, that Patricia and Douglas and her youngest, Robert, had each been, in some way she couldn't fully explain, assessed. She said she did not believe anything harmful had been done. She said she had watched her children sleep on dozens of nights when she was aware, on some level she couldn't defend rationally, that attention was being paid, and that she had made a decision early on that her job was not to interrupt whatever was happening, but to be present for it, to witness it alongside her children without their knowing she was witnessing it. She had appointed herself, in other words, a quiet guardian of something she didn't understand. She said the interest had extended to the grandchildren, that Claire, Patricia's eldest, had as a toddler twice pointed at the back garden in the middle of the night and said a word that Patricia had taken at the time for a mispronunciation of her own name, but that Evelyn believed was something else. She said Claire had stopped doing it by the age of 3. She said that was consistent with what she had observed across all of the children, that whatever receptivity the young ones had, it closed as they got older, like a window that seals itself shut as the house settles. What strikes me most about how Evelyn's family responded to the confession is not the shock, though the shock was real, but the speed with which it reorganized everything they thought they already knew. Patricia told me that within 24 hours of her mother's death she had called Douglas, and they had spent 4 hours on the phone going back through their childhoods together, pulling out memories they had never thought to examine, holding them up against what Evelyn had said, and finding that things which had seemed unremarkable for decades now had a different weight. The curtains left open, the garden rule, the greeting cards, the way their mother sometimes stood at the back window at night with the lights off, just standing, just watching, in a stillness that they had always taken for ordinary and now took for something else entirely. Patricia's daughter, Claire, when told what her grandmother had said about her as a toddler, went quiet for a long time. Then she said she had always felt, for as long as she could remember, that the house on rural Route 9, which she had visited as a child and which had since been sold and renovated beyond recognition, had been watched. Not haunted, watched. She said she had never told anyone because she hadn't had language for it that didn't sound like something a child would say. She had been 11 years old when she stopped having that feeling. She had never connected the timing to anything before. Evelyn Duchamp was a schoolteacher for 23 years. She taught children to read. She corrected their grammar. She sent home progress reports written in careful, measured language that several of her former students have described to me, unprompted, as the clearest communications they received from any adult in their childhood. She was not a woman who exaggerated. She was not a woman who sought attention or drama or the consolation of extraordinary belief. She was a woman who watched something happen to her family across 4 decades, who made a series of deliberate decisions about how to respond to it, who kept a spiral notebook and unmailed greeting cards and a rule about the back garden, and who released the whole of it only in the final hours of her life to the people she had spent those decades protecting. What was she protecting them from? Knowledge, fear, the particular weight of carrying something you can't put down once you've picked it up? Or was she protecting the thing itself, the strange, patient attention that had found her family on rural Route 9 in the summer of 1947? From the disruption that disclosure would bring? I don't know. I'm not sure she fully knew either. I have spent a long time now with the account of Evelyn Duchamp. I have read Patricia's notebook transcriptions. I have looked at photographs of the greeting cards. I have spoken with Claire about the feeling of being watched that left her at 11 and never came back. I have thought about 3 figures moving through a field in diffuse light on a night in late June of 1947, while a 22-year-old woman watched from a window and said nothing, not even to her sleeping husband. I am not prepared to tell you that the Greys visited Evelyn's family across 4 decades. I am not prepared to tell you that the arrangements in the garden were acknowledgements, that the greeting cards marked the birthdays of beings without birth records, that something closed in Claire at 11 the way a window seals as a house settles. I am not prepared to tell you any of that, but I am not prepared to dismiss it either, because the pattern here, jagged and imperfect and leaking at its edges in the specific way that sustained secrets leak, does not look like invention. It looks like a woman who inherited a conversation she hadn't started and spent 40 years sitting with it, tending it, standing at dark windows, watching it unfold across her children and her grandchildren. And finally, when the container could no longer hold, putting it into the hands of the people she had always been trying to protect. What did the Greys observe in 4 decades of watching one family? What did they learn from the children that the children never knew they were giving? What closed in Claire at 11, and why then? And what does it mean that it closed in all the children eventually? What is still in spiral notebooks and recipe boxes and the specific memories of adults who were watched as toddlers and felt it and never had language for what they felt? What was the project? What was this family's portion of it? And somewhere in whatever constitutes their experience of continuity, in that vast patient awareness that doesn't require proximity or sound or the architecture of human communication, are they still watching? I don't know. I'm not sure I'm supposed to.